Good afternoon, everybody. This is the Passball Show for Friday, the 19th day of January 2018. A reminder, if you're interested to call in and be part of the show, the number is 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. Anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. And I tell you, in regards to the campaign, in regards to try to be all on the same page as Americans, I've touched on things that are going on in the world of journalism, and journalism has come to a point where it's too predicated on opinion as opposed to reporting facts. And the simplest way that I can break this down for anybody that may not be understanding what it is that I'm trying to say is that you could talk about any job that's out there as an employer and you as an employee. As the employee, you have a set of criteria in regards to what you have to do for your job, whatever it is. So when we're talking about journalism and we're talking about writers and people that have the responsibility to put together a series of facts so the general public can know information. And I'm sure I didn't word that 100% correctly, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. The job and responsibility of a journalist is to report on a series of facts, because the consumer, which is the reader, the listener, the viewer, however the person is getting their news, just wants to know a series of facts. They want to know what's going on. So now that the media and journalists have taken what used to be reported as facts and is now being reported in terms of opinions and how they feel and hearsay and stuff that is not facts, it's impacting the way that the consumer is receiving their information. So when we're talking about that quote-unquote fake news that's out there, and no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, you say fake news exists, and fake news is almost defined as any news that you don't want to hear or anything that's being reported in a way that you don't like the way it sounds. And it's also when there's so much opinion that's being thrown around it, it's the fact that you don't agree with the opinion that's being put out there. So if we're trying to define what exactly it is that's fake news, it's the whole media landscape when the media, journalists, writers, talk show hosts, people that are responsible for providing facts have decided to provide opinions. And you on the other side that's listening to it that don't agree with that opinion, that's why fake news, or that term fake news, is being thrown out there. Because there's just not enough facts being reported. It's some facts that are true, but everything being twisted to a point where those facts are mixed in with opinions. And it's a problem. And I hope from the consumer standpoint that we start to understand that the media out there, writers, the news as it's being reported, is reporting more facts than opinions. And if we understand that a lot of the stuff out there is biased, we are going to try to find other means, or maybe do a little more research when we're trying to decipher between fact and fiction. Lots of stuff we're going to get into today. There's a couple topics that I've been talking about during the week that we're going to continue to reiterate some points on. You got the situation with the Cavs. We got the Rooney Rule, which we're going, the court decided to rule on the Raiders case, which we're going to touch on in a little bit. And then we got MLB, pace of play, which, by the way, if you're trying to focus on just one aspect and putting in a pitch clock and you think that's going to save or help pace of play by itself, you're mistaken, my friend. Once again, a number, if you're interested, 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. You could comment on the Periscope feed, You can also comment on Facebook Live. And, of course, if you're watching from YouTube, it means it's on delay or on demand per se. But please keep your comments going. Everything that's contributed from the listeners and the people that are viewing to the show is greatly appreciated. And I do try to touch on every comment and everything that is brought up over the course of the program. So once again, Pass Ball Show, baseball, sports, and unifying America. First thing we're going to talk about today, the situation that's going on in Cleveland. And if you listened or watched a couple of the shows earlier in the week, you heard the passion in regards to what I feel about the Cavs players that are either, number one, sneaking to the media, saying, hey, don't use my name in a story, but I want to get this point out there. Or the media that's baiting the players, saying we got this point and we want to make sure that the point gets out there and we want to tie some names to it. So will you volunteer to it? But we will hide your name. So much garbage that's going on in there, but it looks like we may be seeing some positive trending here. And there might be a solution to the problem in Cleveland. And I mentioned yesterday, and I threw names out there, and I threw random names, thinking at some point one of them is going to stick. Is it Tristan Thompson? Is it J.R. Smith? Is it Kevin Love? Is it LeBron James? Who is it that's leaking these stories to the media saying that the Cavaliers, as they're constructed, do not have the ability or do not have enough talent to win an NBA championship? And I said the best way for the Cavaliers, if they want to do something about this story, is find out who those players are and trade them. So there's talks now that the Cavs may be interested in making a trade for Lou Williams from the Los Angeles Clippers. Sixth man of the year, a guy that can certainly help the Cavs in regards to scoring, can maybe lead the second unit. There's possibility that they may be interested in trading for DeAndre Jordan, also from the Clippers. And think about it. If you could package a Lou Williams and DeAndre Jordan, and for the Cavaliers, get rid of some dead weight, no matter how powerful in regards to star talent that the Cavaliers have, the players that are speaking out, the players that don't think that they're good enough to compete and win an NBA championship, they're the ones that need to go in this trade. And if the Cavs are smart enough, they'll figure out who it is that's saying this stuff, and assuming that it isn't LeBron James. And I'm going to go out there and say that. If for some reason it is LeBron James, you got a deeper problem. But if it is any of the other players that I mentioned or anybody else on that Cleveland Cavalier roster, and you can figure out that it's them, or maybe you could challenge them to ask if it is them that made those type of comments, trade them. Put the biggest package together of however many prominent players that you want to throw out there and say, we're claiming that the Cavaliers as a team don't have enough talent to win the NBA championship. Make a huge package with all those players and trade them for players that aren't going to say crap like that and want to win and think that they can win an NBA championship. And if you look at it, you start with DeAndre Jordan and Lou Williams. You're going to be required to pay a lot in regards to talent going back to the Clippers. So put the best package you have together, but first, do your research. Figure out who's leaking stuff to the media. Who is trying to make a statement by saying either the Cavaliers need to make a trade or there's enough unrest in this Cleveland Cavaliers locker room that the players as they exist right now don't think they can win an NBA championship. And after you do that, figure out who the players are and trade them. If they're not that good, trade them for a bucket of basketballs. Trade them for a new net. Trade them for a cheerleader. Whatever they need to trade them for, get those players out of town. Because as long as this is going on, as long as reporters, whether it's from The Athletic, whether it's from CBS Sports, whether it's from ESPN, whether it's from Cleveland.com, these vultures, these vulture reporters are not going to go away. They're going to keep adding to this story. They're going to keep going in their shady, unprofessional manner by protecting the players' names because of these quote-unquote anonymous sources, and it's not going to go away. And the Cavaliers, if they're ahead of this, and they care enough about winning an NBA championship, which I do believe that they feel that way. They think they can compete with the Warriors. Maybe if they make a couple tweaks, they feel like they can be up on that level. The first thing they need to do is figure out who it is that's leaking this stuff to the media and get rid of them. Get them off their roster, get them out of town as fast as they can. But I tell you, if you could start with a trade with the Clippers and get DeAndre Jordan and Lou Williams back, the Cavaliers will be in a much better position. There's also talks how they might be interested in George Hill for the Sacramento Kings. It's time for them to start making moves and get this garbage, get these bad character guys, and I don't care how nice of a people they are, if they're leaking stuff like this to the media, they need to be gotten rid of. Get them off their roster, get them out of town. Next thing I want to talk about, we mentioned earlier in the week about the Rooney Rule and how it exists in the NFL. And today there was a decision made that the Oakland Raiders did not violate the Rooney Rule in regards to hiring John Gruden as their head coach. And I understand that if you listened to my show earlier in the week where I talked in depth about the Rooney Rule, about how I feel about it, and about how I feel that it is very good for not just the NFL, but all sports, to keep the dialogue out there and make sure that they are bringing in minority candidates and set themselves up in a position where there can be more black head coaches and more minority head coaches in all professional sports. Because for some reason, particularly in the sports of football and basketball, you have the majority of players that are black, but only a few head coaches that are black. And there's something that doesn't add up there. So the Rooney Rule was put into place to make sure that more minority candidates, particularly blacks, were getting interviews and opportunities to present how they can be coaches in these respective leagues, particularly in the NFL. But here's where I'm going to tell you that the NFL is right. We could incorporate the Rooney Rule and make that teams need to interview black candidates for head coaching positions. But you can't tell a sports team, and in this case we're talking about the NFL, we cannot tell the NFL who to hire as your head coach. If the Oakland Raiders want to hire John Gruden as their head coach, they have every right to do that. And I respect what Mark Davis did, because Mark Davis didn't hide behind anything. He didn't lie. He didn't say that I'm going to interview a black candidate for the sake of interviewing a black candidate. He wanted John Gruden as his head coach. In fact, you can make a case that the Oakland Raiders do not fire Jack Del Rio if John Gruden isn't ready to become the next head coach. It wouldn't have happened. Jack Del Rio might still be coaching the Oakland Raiders if John Gruden did not accept the job. So if we're talking about the Rooney Rule and the fact that the NFL, in regards to this, should have forced Mark Davis to interview black candidates, he had already made up his mind. He had already hired John Gruden. It was about either hiring John Gruden or likely sticking with Jack Del Rio as his head coach. So you can't, no matter how much you enforce the Rooney Rule, no matter how much you make it about the need to interview more minority candidates for these jobs when they come out, you cannot tell a National Football League organization, a team, and ownership who to hire. Because it's almost bordering on how there's going to be a group of black head coaching candidates, and they're going to tell teams that you have to hire one of these. And it's not a racial issue. The racial issue exists with the amount of National Football League coaches that are not black. I mean, the fact that we're only dealing with a couple in a league is a disgrace by itself. And I said before, the other reason that it benefits any candidate that has the opportunity to interview for a coaching job in the NFL, especially in situations where they're unlikely to get the job, is that person has a chance to make his case. That person has a chance to put together a presentation that blows that ownership group and organization out of the water. And if it's a close situation, he'll get that job. But if he doesn't get the job, word of mouth will allow for him to get a job down the road. The one thing that bothers me in regards to the fact that, there aren't as many black head coaches in the National Football League is the Rooney Rule has existed for this long, and it doesn't seem to be making enough progress. But you can't look at one situation, in this case, Mark Davis and the Oakland Raiders, and say that he's being racist because he didn't hire a black head coach. Like I said, the job went to John Gruden because John Gruden was available. It didn't go to John Gruden because he's white. If John Gruden did not want the job, Jack Del Rio may still be the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. So the last thing I have to say about the Rooney Rule, I do think that Steve Wilkes has a very good chance of maybe getting a job in Arizona, maybe getting a job in Tennessee. There are enough minority candidates out there that they all should be getting interviews. And it is up to these candidates to go out there and do a good job. If you're getting an opportunity, which, the Rooney Rule is stepping up the fact that more minority candidates will get an opportunity, the onus is on them to earn the job. Be prepared. Do what you need to do. Make it impossible for the owner to say no. Have a plan. Have a coaching staff. Have a philosophy. Sit in that boardroom and make it happen. Moving on, I want to touch on this pace of play thing in regards to Major League Baseball. Once again, I'll throw the number out there if you're interested in being part of the show. 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. Major League Baseball looks like, in spite of a little bit of an issue with a pitch clock that they're looking to incorporate into the game, looks like they may end up doing it anyway. The thing that bothers me this is, it kind of is frustrating to look at it because I don't think we really understand the impact in regards to pace of play. Now, the people that are the most behind this interest in speeding up the game of baseball may, number one, be frustrated about the ratings of the National Football League, which, by the way, they are down, the growth of professional basketball and college sports, and even in some cases, world soccer and the NHL and hockey. And they feel like they're almost on defense in regards to needing to protect the game or save the game or keep the amount of fans that are going to other places from going to other places. What these people are failing to acknowledge is that fans are not showing up at stadiums or aren't tuned in to as many baseball games for a lot of other reasons than just the speed of a game of baseball. You could talk about a 3.5 to 4 hour game as being hard to keep somebody interested the entire time. But if, hypothetically, we chipped some minutes off the game and cut it back from 3.5 to 4 hours to 3 to 3.5 hours to 2.5 to 3 hours, there's no proof that it's going to increase viewership or attendance. The problem has to do partially with the generation that we are in now. We're in a high technology generation. People have everything at the fingertips. They may not be showing up at a ballpark or listening to the game on the radio or watching the game on TV, but they're likely following it through their mobile device, whether it's their phone or their iPad or their computer. We got mobile updates that if you're a fan of whatever team, you're kept updated in how things are going in a game. You get scoring updates. You get updates on any information that's going on while you're following your favorite team. So we got one aspect where technology is being thrown in everybody's face, and they're taking advantage of having it at their fingertips. People know what's going on in a baseball game that they're watching or they're not watching. They could be there at the stadium, and they could be doing something else. But conversely, they could be doing anything it is that they want to do. They could be sitting in a pool. They could be at the beach. They could be at their job. They could be actually playing a game of baseball. But they can keep updated in what's going on in the sport that they're watching. You got fantasy baseball, which, just like, in the NFL, has taken over the game. Gambling, people are gambling every day on individual games, seasons that they're part of in leagues. So the interest in following your favorite team to watch them for whether it's 3 hours or 2.5 hours or 4 or 5 hours, you're probably not going to get the attention span of that person for the entire time. So Major League Baseball thinks that they're coming in on their white horse and they're saving the game by this great idea of thinking of ways to speed up the pace of play. Put a pitch clock in there. Well, I'll tell you, you can't just go after the pitchers, because once again, in a game that already has seemed to swing too much towards the offense, you're making a hitter's job easier. When you're telling a pitcher they have a certain amount of time to release the ball, it's benefiting the batters. Yet you got batters that are going to sit here and play around with their stupid gloves that they have on. They're going to adjust their bat. They're going to rub their crotch. They're going to do whatever they need to do between pitches. And that's not speeding up the game either. So if you're going to enforce a pitch clock, you have to make sure that batters stay in the batter's box and penalize them if they keep stepping out of the batter's box and adjusting their jock strap every single pitch. If you're not going to change that, then you shouldn't have any right to put a pitch clock in. And I understand why there's disputes about it right now. You can talk about the time between innings, but God forbid you ever did that. Baseball is making so much money for their advertisers and their sponsors, and God forbid you cut one 30-second commercial between innings. Don't ever mess with their money. They know they're making the money through their sponsors. So when we're talking about pace of play and how it, it's only benefiting the fans. A fan that's at a game and can have 30 seconds to a minute chipped off the time they got to wait for the next half inning to start. Don't you think that'll be beneficial to the fans? So if we cared about the fans and it was solely about the fans and keeping them in the ballpark and keeping them intrigued and interested, don't you think the time between innings would be an issue or would at least be tabled for discussion? It isn't. And the honest and clear reason that it isn't, it's because it would cost baseball money. And it's more of a reiteration that it has nothing to do with the fans. MLB trying to save pace of play has nothing to do with the fans. If it did, they would do something about the time between innings. They're doing it because they're worried They're worried that more people are going to go elsewhere. And they're not going to get enough re-upping on the subscription to MLB.com app. And there aren't going to be as many people showing up at the ballpark. There aren't going to be as many people tuning into the games on TV and on radio. But God forbid you did anything that would risk the amount of money that's coming into the game through its sponsors. And the thought of cutting one 30-second commercial or one 1-minute commercial in between innings. No, we can't do that. So if we're going to do pitch clocks, we got to do something about the batter stepping out of the batter's box. You got to do something about the mound visits when the catchers feel like they could go out there 20 times in an inning. So if they're going to put something together that incorporates pace of play, it needs to involve 4 things, not just the pitch clock. You start with the pitch clock. You do something about the batter stepping out of the box. And if they do it too much, you cause them a strike. And if the pitcher can't deliver the ball in 30 seconds, it's a ball. Make it work both sides. Batter stays in the box. The pitcher pitches within 30 seconds. You'll speed up the game real quick. You'll have whole counts that'll go by without a pitch even having to be thrown. Number 3, mound visits. You give the pitching coach or the manager one opportunity to go out there to the mound. And if you want to increase it by 1 or 2 to include the catcher going out to the mound, you set it up to where the 3rd time somebody goes to the mound, whether it's a pitching coach or a catcher, that pitcher has to come out of the game. And a mound visit is when a catcher takes a step past home plate. Because once you take the step past home plate, you might as well go out to the mound because it's counting as a mound visit. And you set up 3 mound visits, and the 3rd mound visit, that pitcher has to come out of the game. And it doesn't matter if somebody's warming up. You'll speed up the pace of play very quick. And the last one, and I'm telling you, every single one of these things must be part of the pace of play. The last one, cut 1 solid minute out of each half inning. And I don't care how much money it's costing in advertising. The last pitch is thrown, set it up to where if it's 4 minutes, cut it down to 3 minutes. If it's 3.5 minutes, cut it down to 2.5 minutes. And I don't care how many commercials they don't get a chance to run between the time where the last out is made and the first pitch is thrown in the next inning. If you want to do pitch clocks, all right, do pitch clock number 1, batter staying in the batter's box or it's causing them a strike. Number 2, mound visits. The 3rd time somebody comes out to the mound, a pitcher has to come out of the game. And number 4, cut down the time between innings. And if you want pace of play, you better do all 4 of them. Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you. Once again, the number 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. Now, going on as we're talking about baseball, you have the opportunity, which we'll do Pielli's football picks in a little bit. But JD Martinez looks like he's having some dialogue with the Boston Red Sox, and this is usually how the offseason goes. Unfortunately, it doesn't go as slow as it has to this point. But, the high demands that are out there in regards to the players and their agents, they're asking for a lot of money. JD Martinez is asking for probably $200 million. Listen, it's halfway through the month of January. We're moving into February. I promise you, there are not a ton of teams knocking at the door to sign this guy. And it's not that he doesn't have value. I told you 4 years ago when J.D. Martinez was playing for the Houston Astros that he was going to be a star. Unfortunately, the Astros didn't listen to me. They let him go. He signed with the Tigers. This is a guy that over the course of the next 4 or 5 or even 6 years is going to be a premier power hitter. And if you look at what he did in the second half of the season last year from Arizona, he's proven he can carry a team. So it seems right now that there aren't enough teams that, number one, from a financial standpoint, are interested in throwing out that kind of money, and number two, have enough of a need. The one team that I thought would be an absolute fit for J.D. Martinez, as we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show, once again, this is John Pielli. Happy to be with you on the 19th day of January 2018. We'll be on until about 9 o'clock. We'll do Pielli's football picks in a little bit. But the San Francisco Giants need an increase in their offense, need a face of their offensive franchise, would be ideally the perfect fit for J.D. Martinez. You put him in there, whether it's in right field or left field. I know they made the trade for Andrew McCutchen. I know they made the trade for Evan Longoria. But I tell you, you add that one premium bat in there, and I'm starting to take the San Francisco Giants seriously. The problem is they want to stay under the luxury tax threshold. That's the same reason why the Yankees haven't been as active. That's the same reason the Dodgers, who may be another good fit for J.D. Martinez, are not going to be as active. Many teams want to stay under the luxury tax threshold so they can go after the free agent class of 2018. There's going to be plenty of offers for Bryce Harper and Manny Machado and maybe Clayton Kershaw if he decides to be a free agent. He wants to opt out of his deal. So it's like teams are looking to stay at a point where they don't want to splurge on a J.D. Martinez or an Eric Hosmer or a Lorenzo Cain or Jonathan Lucroy or Mike Moustakas or Todd Frazier. These are guys that if they happen to be free agents next year, they may be able to get a more lucrative contract at that point. But I'm looking at this from many angles because there's the collusion thought that was brought in there. Is there collusion going on with owners that are getting together saying we're not going to sign players? I don't think it's collusion. I think it's finally the implications of MLB implementing their soft salary cap. And we don't want to call it a salary cap because the Players Association would go nuts. But Major League Baseball has finally implemented something that is able to curtail the salaries of top players in Major League Baseball. It took a little while before it started to make a difference, but now it has. The fact that a team that goes over $197 million in regards to their payroll has to pay such a tax and, a compound interest, almost like that of a credit card, on any salary that they pay outside of $197 million has taken a little while, but teams are realizing that they can't afford, or it's not a good business decision to be above 197. So now the Dodgers, who looked like they were year after year after year going to blow past it, have finally realized that financially it doesn't make sense for them to do that anymore. And teams like the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Tigers and the Giants, teams that didn't mind spending more than that, all of a sudden mind. Now, what separates baseball from other sports, and the reason that it isn't a total salary cap, is the fact that teams are allowed to, if they can get their salary for their payroll under $197 million for an entire season, it resets their clock and allows them to blow over it without as much serious ramifications. Yes, they will still have to pay a tax on everything that's over $197 million, but it won't compound to the point that it does when you do it after year 2 or year 3 or year 4. So you got an opportunity to reset yourself and not have it be as much of a financial burden on an organization. So I see it as Major League Baseball and the owners finally curtailing the salaries that are going on in baseball, something that they've been trying to do since the advent of free agency in the 1970s. The reserve clause existed for so many years, and Curt Flood and Marvin Miller should be looked at as heroes. Their names should be thrown out there a lot more because of what they were willing to do. And Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally, for their willingness to play an entire season and not get paid. You know, Catfish Hunter, who was able to find a mistake in one of the payments that Charles Finley was going to give him. All those players and people that are associated with the game that started free agency. Things for about 30 and almost 40 years have continued to spiral in a player's direction in regards to salaries in Major League Baseball. They are certainly some of the most compensated people in the entire profession of work. The owners, with the implementation of the luxury tax, it's taken a while, but they've finally been able to get to a point where salaries will be curtailed. If you look at the top free agents that signed last offseason, Yoenis Cespedes got $110 million over 4 years. This year, the top contract that's been signed to this point is Carlos Santana being guaranteed $60 million. And yes, J.D. Martinez will be compensated over $100 million. The Red Sox are talking at about $125 now, but it's certainly not what him and his agent were asking for when the offseason started. He was looking at about $200 million. Eric Hosmer was thought to get around $200 million. Maybe Hosmer gets $140. Maybe Martinez could get something around there, but the bottom line is the demand for these high-priced players that in a normal offseason would be signing record-breaking contracts, is not out there. It's not out there for a couple reasons. The first one I just talked about. Teams wanting to stay under the luxury tax threshold, resetting their clocks so they could go out after the free agent class of 2018. But sabermetrics has had a lot to do with it too. The studies of analytics and understanding that certain values and certain numbers that get produced year in and year out can be supplemented by players that happen to make less money. By players, if you're looking for players that get on base, if you're looking for players that have higher slugging percentages, teams are finding that those certain players are not asking for as much money. Players that are coming over from different countries, whether it's Korea or Japan, aren't signing those huge lucrative contracts. You know, look at an Eric Thames from the Milwaukee Brewers. He signs a 3-year contract. He was putting up MVP type of numbers in Korea. The Brewers look at the grand scheme of what they're looking for in regards to on-base percentage, a little bit of slugging, and they got an everyday first baseman for the next couple of years. You could go back to Moneyball. It's Scott Hatterberg. Formulas, as they're put in, as we're looking for offensive players that are willing to provide on-base percentage and power. And you're looking at the superstar players, the ones that could kind of do it all. And good teams are looking past that and saying that they can get by with other players. And those other players are keeping salaries down. And it's not the other player's fault. Obviously, somebody that's making, $8 million a year instead of a player that's making $20 million a year, that $8 million a year player wants to make $20 million a year. But right now, it's not being justified. Teams are supplementing the type of power and on-base percentage that they're looking for in their lineups with players that are willing to take on a lesser salary. And in the end, when it comes to J.D. Martinez, when it comes to Eric Hosmer, there will be a team that's interested enough. And I'm using what's going on in Boston, the discussions between the Red Sox and J.D. Martinez, as a prime example. J.D. Martinez wants $200 million over 8 years. No team in baseball is looking to pay that right now. But what the Red Sox are saying, they said they're interested. Let's talk. Let's throw a number at you and see what you think about it. J.D. Martinez and Scott Boras can be stubborn and say, we're not going to take that number at $100 million. We're not going to take that number at $125 million. But there's going to come a point where the Boston Red Sox are going to say, we're not going to pay more than this. Is it 125? Is it 140? Is it 150? But whatever it is, the Red Sox, who I'm using as the example in this situation, are going to say, we are not going to pay J.D. Martinez more than this over the terms of this contract. So at that point, J.D. Martinez and Scott Boras have a choice. They could either take the Red Sox highest offer, or they could say no. And I tell you, Scott Boras, as an agent, as an empire, which is pretty much what he is, has to understand the changes that are going on in the game of baseball. I mean, the power trip that he's continuing to use to rise and increase player salaries at some point is going to level off. And in some cases already has. The fact that Scott Boras thinks that $20 million in 2000 is going to become $40 million in 2020, that's wishful thinking. And I tell you, we will really start to see whether player salaries in Major League Baseball are officially leveling off after what happens next offseason. Now, you may have the Giants and the Dodgers and the Yankees have a bidding war like no other for Bryce Harper and Manny Machado. And that might scare away some other teams that might have thought that they were able to jump in. Maybe the Phillies. Maybe a team like the Minnesota Twins, who might think that they're going to be in a legitimate spot then. There's a lot of teams that are going to be interested. But player salaries in Major League Baseball, I'm telling you this, and I'm predicting this, over the course of the next 10 years are going to go down. We're starting to see it because of the supplementing of offense that's found in other positions and other people with different ability. Guys with higher on-base percentage, but maybe not a lot of power. You may not consider paying that person $20 million, but you'll pay them $8 million. Starting pitchers who are not going any more than 6 innings anymore. How are you in this day and age in Major League Baseball? And I'm not just talking about the value of money here. I'm not talking about it as a person in a different profession. How can you justify in 2018 paying a starting pitcher $30 million a year? Is that worth more than what a pitcher was providing for you in 1980? Tom Seaver, Steve Carlton, Gaylord Perry, Nolan Ryan. Guys that were going out there pitching 8, 9 innings every game. And you're going to tell me that in 2018, a starting pitcher that gets a pat on the back if the manager is going out there, taking him out in the 6th inning of a 1-run game, can possibly, under any circumstance, be worth $30 million a year. If you're Zach Greinke or if you're David Price, more should be expected out of you. You should be treated differently than that average starter that's being taken out in the 6th inning. And I'm sorry, for $30 million a year, I want to see more out of my starting pitcher. If not, a Major League Baseball team has a right to find somebody that's going to go 5 or 6 innings for $5 million a year or less. So the one thing that I will say that will be a big concern if we see, and we talked about it earlier in the week, the Arrietas, the Darvishes, and on the lower level, the Cobbs and the Lins. If those guys aren't seeing a reduction in pay in regards to the offers that are being thrown out there for Major League Baseball teams, I don't know what else to say. Jake Arrieta and Yu Darvish are pretty damn good pitchers. And if I'm a team that is a top starting pitcher away, I'd love to have them on my team. But there has to be some perspective thrown out there. Salaries are going to start going down in Major League Baseball, and it's going to start with the higher end guys. It's going to start with starting pitchers. Because you're not paying a starting pitcher to go 7 innings anymore, or 8 innings, or pitch complete games anymore. You see what's happened with relief pitchers. Relief pitchers are starting to get more compensated because their value is higher than it's ever been. You need 3 or 4 pitchers to finish a game now. And you need a dominant pitcher in the 7th, a dominant pitcher in the 8th, and a dominant pitcher in the 9th. And for those pitchers that have been getting the job done, the ones that have 12, 13, 14 strikeouts per 9 innings pitched, and are throwing 95 to 100 miles an hour, and are dominating game after game, are starting to get the money that they deserve. And paying a pitcher $7, $8, $9, $10 million to pitch 1 inning is starting to be justified. But what is not justified is a starting pitcher getting paid any more than they ever had before. That contract that Zach Greinke signed for $34, $35 million on an average annual value over the course of 6 years should be the highest contract for a starting pitcher in baseball history and should remain the highest contract signed by a starting pitcher in baseball history. And we'll see how it turns out. You know, you look at the likes of a Noah Syndergaard, or at some point a Corey Kluber. You know, Chris Sale will be a free agent at some point. Max Scherzer's already making $30 million a year, which, by the way, this doesn't get spoken about a lot. MLB Network will throw up his contract, 7 years, $210 million. Few people talk about that. Max Scherzer is getting paid $15 million a year for 14 years. He has got exactly half of his contract deferred over the next course of 7 years. And you may say, all right, he's getting paid $210 million regardless. But he's not getting paid $30 million a year. Yes, he's likely to pitch after his contract's over. So he'll be getting paid $15 million a year on top of whatever he's earning in his next contract, maybe even for another team. But the Lerner family deferred that contract over 14 years. But when we're talking about contracts in baseball, I'm telling you, something that's been going on for 40 years has finally plateaued. And it's not because of collusion. The owners haven't gotten together and say we're not paying players anymore. It's the fear of getting over the luxury tax threshold, which is something that Major League Baseball has put in. So the Major League Baseball commissioner's office and the owners have found a way to get owners to not spend recklessly. The compound interest that's involved with a team being over the luxury tax threshold for a series of years has scared teams to get under 197. So in a elongated way, it's the enforcement of a soft salary cap. But you have sabermetrics and analytics and teams that are looking with their staff of the Harvard and Yale graduates and people that know nothing about baseball but know everything about numbers. They found different ways to find players that interest them that aren't going to cost them as much money. You know what they did? They shopped for cheaper prices. They did what any consumer would do. You're tired of paying a lot of money for food? Well, you're going to start to find other places that sell food for a cheaper price. And you know what? That food tastes just as good. In some cases, is just as much quality in regards to what you're eating before, but you're finding a way to spend less money on food. Now, what baseball teams have decided to do is they're finding players that can do most of the same things that these high-priced players can do. Offensively, we're finding players that can get on base at just as high of a clip. That may not hit as many home runs, but hit doubles and drive in runs and produce offense. The way a lot of higher priced players were doing. And they're finding a way to pay those players less. So they're shopping. They're shopping for cheaper alternatives, more cost-efficient alternatives. And they're doing it in a smarter way. So this thought, and whether it's Scott Boras by himself, or it's the Players Association, or it's agencies throughout the country and the world, the thought that they're going to continue to drive up salaries in Major League Baseball was something that was meant to at least plateau and in some cases end. Salaries in Major League Baseball will be controlled at some point. We'll find out what happens after this offseason. But I will tell you right off the bat, I'm starting to have doubts over the likes of a Bryce Harper or Manny Machado getting a $400 million contract. Now, if you're able to create a bidding war, if you're able to create a team that wants a player that bad, that's willing to pay that kind of money, that's one thing. But the negotiation between the Players Association and the owners in collective bargaining has not set up anything in regards to the luxury tax increasing by that much. Teams are still going to have to deal with a budget. And if we're talking about a player making $40 million a year, and assuming that you were at $197 million with that $40 million contract, you're talking about 20% of your entire team's salary going to one player. And if 197 becomes 198 or 201 or 204, how can a team justify one player making 20% of their entire payroll when there's 24 more players on their roster? Likely a couple others that are going to be on and off. Players that are injured that are being paid. So you're going to talk about a team that's going to sign two $40 million players? Saying two players are going to equal 40% of your entire team's payroll? What we're looking at here is the first sign of salaries being curtailed in Major League Baseball. I want to spend a little time doing Pielli's picks. As we're looking at the odds here, last week was a lousy week, and partially was because of the spreads, but I had it all wrong last week. The first week, we ended up going 2-2 in the postseason. Last week, we had the goose egg. And that means in order to make up the ground over a 0-4 week, we have to win the next 3, which means most of the championship games, which we're going to see this weekend, and the Super Bowl. So the first game we're going to pick, New England Patriots at home against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And what I'm going to bet on here is Tom Brady being healthy enough, because the spread's going down. It went from 9 to 7. And I'm going with the Patriots with the thought that Tom Brady's going to be healthy enough. And if he is, they're going to game plan against the Jacksonville defense. They're going to game plan against the Jacksonville offense. I can't see the Jags getting anything going offensively. And unless the Jaguars are going to get a couple shots in against Brady early and maybe have something that impacts his hand, I think the Patriots are going to be able to win by more than 7. So first pick this week, New England at home, -7 against Jacksonville. Next game, Minnesota at Philadelphia. And I picked this game on the open mic show yesterday, but I didn't have the spread going with me. So if I was going to say the Eagles were going to win, maybe they win by 1 or 2. And if they won by 3, it would be a push in this case. So I'm going against my pick on the open mic program with Michael Cohen. And I think the Eagles, who are getting 3 at home, I think the Vikings are going to be able to hold off. So I'm actually going to contradict my pick. I think that the Vikings could win here. But if they do, they got to win by 4. I think it's going to be close enough. So I'm going to stick with the Eagles +3 at home against the Minnesota Vikings. I think the Vikings might win the game outright. But the Eagles giving 3 points at home is a tough call. So I'm still debating this as we're getting into the waning moments of the past ball show. I kind of don't know what way to go.